I found that I was getting similar questions. Why is my period so heavy? Is period pain normal? What can I do about these things? What's a menstrual cycle? Writing the book was a good way to kind of cut through the noise and be able to present this information in a way that was easy for people to understand. And that was something I was really passionate about. It was written in a kind of layperson's language as much as possible, so that anyone could pick it up and flip through the pages and get a better understanding of menstrual health, hormones, periods, and then the phases of the menstrual cycle, and then different conditions that fall out of that.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Big T, Little T. Today I am joined by the wonderful Lenise brothers. Lenise, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me on the show.
Thank you so much for taking the time out. Lenise, we've been conversing for quite a while now, and I just absolutely love the work that you do. So I'm really happy to have you on the podcast. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell our wonderful guests all about the work that you do?
Yeah, so my name's Lenise Brothers. I'm a nutritionist specialising in women's health, hormones, and the menstrual cycle. And I'm also the author of the book, You Can Have a Better Period. And I am a yoga teacher. And yeah, that's kind of the work that I do. I work with women on a one-to-one basis in group programs, workshops, and really my passion is about helping women have a better period, helping them understand their body. So body literacy is a really big thing for me, and helping them understand that there is a better way. They don't have to live with these things that we get taught are normal in our culture, like painful periods, heavy periods, and all of that.
Yeah, and then so you mentioned the phrase there, body illiteracy. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
So body literacy.
Literacy.
Yeah, I think it's something that is really important, because when you understand how your body works, and I'm not saying that everyone needs to have a degree in anatomy or biology or physiology. It's just understanding basic things like, what does it look like? Or what does it feel like when you ovulate? When do you ovulate? Understanding things like, what is the cervical fluid that you see in your knickers after you finish your period? And knowing things like that's not something that is dirty, or it's not a yeast infection. Just knowing things like, what is the fertile window? What is a normal period? What is it? What are the signs that you need to go and get help? Those basic things that I don't think that we get taught well, certainly I wasn't taught in school, and time I talk about these things, people are like, oh my gosh, I didn't know this. Like, I did this thing on my TikTok recently where I was basically saying that, talking about the fertile window, and that there are 7 days where 6 days within your menstrual cycle that you can possibly get pregnant. And yes, technically, you will actually get pregnant when you ovulate, but the fact that the sperm lives in the cervical crypts for 6 days, I did a little video on that, and it blew people's minds. I think it had something like 2 million views. And
wow.
Yeah, I didn't know this. Why didn't we get taught this in school? Why did I get put on birth control? Why did I think I could get pregnant every single day? I find it absolutely stunning that we just don't learn these things.
Yeah, and I think because I was a guest on your podcast about 2 years ago now.
Yeah.
Absolutely love your podcast. And that is a lot of, I mean, I'm wondering, you know, what you sort of shared there, like just how little that people know about their cycle. Was that one of the things that sort of motivated you to create your podcast on the theme that you created it around?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. So when I was first thinking about putting together a podcast, well, I kept getting told, oh, you should do a podcast. You could do a podcast. And I didn't know what I wanted to do, what the topic should be. I knew that I didn't want to have one of those podcasts where every week it was just me talking. That just wasn't, I love those sort of podcasts. And there are lots of podcasts in my playlist that I listen to that are like that. But for me, that wasn't what I wanted to do. And I started thinking, okay, well, what about people talking about their periods? What would that look like? And then I started like seeing all of these women talking about their birth stories and, you know, the good, the bad, the ugly. And then I thought, what I never hear is women and people with periods talking about the story of their first period. Wouldn't that be interesting as a kind of jumping off point to a bigger conversation? And that's kind of where I started. And I'm naturally a really curious, nosy person. And I thought, okay, well, this is just an excuse for me to have conversations with lots of really interesting women. And so that's where it started. And we just wrapped up season 7, and
wow.
75 episodes, which it
amazing.
just blows my mind.
So a podcast veteran at this point. I'm sure 75 episodes must make you a podcast veteran. What would you say? So would you say then through these conversations, what are some common themes that come up through these conversations in terms of like common things that women have shared in regards to their first periods?
The common themes are shame, a lot of shame, a lot of secrecy, a lot of not knowing enough about what was actually happening. And yeah, I'd say shame is a big one. Shame about this thing that was happening to them. Even when they knew what was going to happen, their mom had spoken to them about it, or they had older sisters or cousins or whatever. It was just the shame of, oh, now I'm different, or now I'm a woman. And, you know, it's really interesting where I've had a few guests say, oh yeah, I got my period and I knew I was a woman. And I just, you know now, okay, having a period doesn't really make you a woman. You can get pregnant, but you're 9, you're 10, you're 11, you're 12. You're not a woman, you know? You're still a child. And I think that shame narrative, it persists, even though we have so many conversations now about, you know, periods, and certainly in the younger generation, there's a lot of like more openness about periods and menstrual health. Even amongst younger women that I've interviewed, there is still this kind of like inkling of shame in their experience, which I just find so fascinating.
Yeah, and I do remember that from one of the conversations that we had, and I thought of you actually. I was going to a club, and I was they have to search your bag before you go in, and I always carry tampons with me, like regardless whether I need them or not, because I know someone might need them. So I've always got tampons with me, and I had a male friend standing behind me in the queue, and they went through my bag, and then there were my supersized tampons, and he saw it and did this weird thing of like looking away, and then I felt embarrassed, but I thought I've never felt embarrassed about tampons before, but it was just his reaction, and I just thought, what? Yeah, it kind of got me thinking about sort of what you mentioned there, like that shame that we just somehow associate with these things, that is with our cycle, which is just so natural that there's nothing it's quite strange how that's a reaction.
Yeah, I think that that's one of the reasons why it's really important that we bring boys and men into these conversations where they learn about periods early on as part of like health class, or, you know, of course, if they take biology, they'll learn it as part of biology, but, you know, taking the kind of science out of it and just being able to teach them and like, this is natural. This isn't something that's dirty. There's no shame here. It's a natural body function, so that when they get older, if they, you know, they have a girlfriend or a wife that has a partner with their period, that if they need to go to the store to buy pads or tampons or whatever, it's not a big deal. You know, no. It's so funny. You see these videos on like TikTok or Instagram of, you know, oh, my partner went to, or my boyfriend went to the store and look at all of my first day of my period. He knew it was my period. I got my period, and look at all these things that he got me. And the comments are like, oh, this is amazing. I wish my boyfriend or husband or whoever was like this. And just, you know, of course not, you know, this isn't normal, but just think of the brownie points that they get with the partners.
From the level up.
Yeah, big time.
It's important to know this stuff. Absolutely. And then, so you've got your podcast that's been running for, how many years has that been going then? So 75 episodes.
4 years.
4 years, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, this is episode number 2 of this podcast, so I'm not even going to think about 4 years time. I'm just going to take one day at a time. So you've got your podcast, which is doing brilliantly, and then fairly recently, well, actually maybe it's been a year now, you released your first book.
Yeah, a year, last March 2022.
All right, so almost. So of course I will link put a link to the book in the actual show notes. But can you tell us a little bit more about the book and what readers can expect from it and what you would hope they take away?
Yeah, so I wrote the book because I found that I was getting similar questions. You know, why is my period so heavy? Is period pain normal? What can I do? What can I do about these things? What's a menstrual cycle? And writing the book was a good way to kind of cut through the noise and be able to present this information in a way that was easy for people to understand. So you don't need to have a degree in biology to read my book. And that was something I was really passionate about. You know, it was written in a kind of layperson's language as much as possible, so that anyone could pick it up and flip through the pages and get a better understanding of menstrual health, hormones, periods, and then the phases of the menstrual cycle, and then different conditions that fall out of that. And it's really been wonderful seeing the reactions and the kind of impact that the book has had, you know, people saying, you know, you've changed my life. You know, you have, you know, helped me understand my body better. And that's what I wanted. I wanted to just be able to have something that I could point people to say, read this and it will help you.
Yeah, absolutely love it. And then, what's the reaction been to the book, so far?
Yeah, really good. It's definitely been one of those books that it's been a real word of mouth sort of book. And so it's one like I see people say, oh, you got to read this book, or my friend gave me your book, or my cousin or whoever. And I think it's one of those books that I think is really, it's evergreen, where the information, maybe there will be new research that comes out in like the next few years, but 5 years down the line, you can read the book and it will still be relevant. 10 years down the line, you can read the book and it will still be relevant. And that's what I want. And so the reaction has been really good, and I want it to continue to be one of those word of mouth books that, gets passed around and continues to have an impact.
Yeah. I know for sure when we had our Instagram conversation, I had so many people thanking me for that conversation, because like you said, there's just a lot that I guess one can assume that people might know about their bodies, but actually the reality is that many women weren't taught certain things about their periods. And I think, like you said, your book is so accessible in understanding, how, like you said, how to have a better period, but even understanding your cycle, understand what's happening in different phases. I was even learning things. I say even like I'm some expert, but I learned things from it. I've got lots of little tabs there still, and it is a book that I do like to refer back to. You have your reference books. This is definitely one of my reference books.
So that's
absolutely
amazing.
love it. Absolutely love it. And so one of the things I really want to pick your brain on, because this is something that I see a lot in my practice, which is people's link with their various parts of their menstrual cycle and their mental health experiences. And you sort of talked earlier about that body literacy, make sure I get that right, body literacy, and how, so few people understand how to even what's going on in their cycle from one part to another. So what tips would you give to someone who wanted to start to track their menstrual cycle and see whether it is impacting their mental well-being, or just to track it, just to know, I suppose, as well, is a good thing?
Yeah, I think tracking your menstrual cycle is a really great starting point to understand patterns in symptoms, so that you can go to the doctor and you can have a really kind of a much more fluent conversation about what's going on with your body. You can say, okay, my period is however many days, and this is what happens to me on day 2 or day 3. My menstrual cycle is however many days, and the average number of days of your cycles over the last kind of 3 months. And to be able to say, like, I notice, like, a week before I start my period, this is how I feel. It's 5 days before I start my period, I get really moody or I get really angry. And this is something that I've noticed over the last 4 menstrual cycles. And this is the effect that it's having on my life. And just to be able to have that more fluent conversation and have a vocabulary about what's going on with your body and your health, so that you don't go to the doctor or see a healthcare professional and say, I get moody before my period, and that's it. You can say more, because the more you say, the better help you're going to be able to get. So to start to track your menstrual cycle, it's really simple. You can go as deep or as very kind of light on this as you want. So when does your period start? When does it end? When do you ovulate? That's the kind of basics, like really foundation. And some people, that's it. And that's kind of where I've got to now. I just notice when my period starts and it ends. I notice when I ovulate because I can feel it. And yeah. And
what do you feel?
I feel this like really strong pinch. And because I have endometriosis,
Yes,
some months it's like really intense. And sometimes I have other digestive symptoms around ovulation. And then you can go up a level. So, I'll give you an example. So I am 43 and I am in kind of early perimenopause. And I noticed that I started to get these really intense migraines about 3 to 4 days before my period started. And of course, I had to immediately get curious about what was going on. So I started doing more detailed tracking. Okay, when are these migraines happening? When do they stop? And then I started, okay, what am I going to do about this? And that's where the tracking went up a level, where I was able to say, okay, for the last 6 months, this is when the migraines are happening. It's like an experiment that I conducted with myself. This is what I did this month. This is what I did that month. And this is what made a difference. And, of course I could do that experiment because this is the work that I do. But even for like the average person, being able to go a little bit deeper and say, okay, this is my menstrual cycle. My period, it starts, it ends. This is when I ovulate. And then say that you notice you get bloated before your period. When is the bloating happening? How long does it last? Is there anything that you do that makes a difference? And then just start to just note those things down. So then it's about you having this vocabulary about what you're experiencing.
Yeah, and I love that because you sort of said there, tracking it over a few cycles. So not just using like, one cycle here and there. Actually, I think you said sort of 4 cycles or so, and then starting to spot, I guess, a pattern. And I guess the other thing I like what you said there as well is the you starting to build a vocabulary. So like some people will read something and think, oh, that must be what happens within myself, but actually understanding what happens for you and what different things that you might do that may help or make things or exacerbate things.
Yeah.
So really getting curious about your own body. I love that. That's so helpful. Thank you. And there's lots of, if you want to go deeper into that, anyone listening in, there's so much more in the book around, the different phases of the cycle. And Elise, I love that you've even got like different sort of yoga poses that you can do. Bringing in all those skills. Yeah. Absolutely love it. So when we're talking about, I'm trying to choose my words carefully because I have you in front of me. So I don't want to say problematic, but I want to say maybe painful periods or unpleasant periods. I don't know. Maybe you can help with the vocab here. Yeah. But some of the terms that I came across was PMS, which is the common one that most people will hear, and maybe even sometimes gets overused weaponized against women, I would say. And then the other one was premenstrual dysphoric disorder. And so I wanted to know a little bit more about those two things and what the differences are between them.
Yeah, so I think, you can have problematic periods. I don't think that's like the wrong phrase to use. I do like the idea of there is a kind of idea of having a normal period. There's what we consider biologically normal. I know normal can be a loaded word in a lot of other concepts, but when it comes to a period, there is what is biologically normal. When it comes to PMS and PMDD, so PMS or premenstrual syndrome. So I have a big issue with premenstrual syndrome because all it is a syndrome. So a syndrome is a collection of different symptoms, and they kind of get grouped together and then like, oh, okay, it's this label. But the problem with talking simply about PMS and saying, oh, I have PMS or I'm PMSing or something like that, is that, again, going back to this idea of having a vocabulary about your body, is that you're not getting specific enough about what you're experiencing. Because when you dig deeper, you say, okay, you say you have PMS, but what's really going on? Are you having mood swings? Are you experiencing depression? Are you anxious? Are you experiencing bloating? Are you experiencing pain? Are you experiencing cravings? Like, dig a little bit deeper and let's talk about what's actually going on. Because all of those things that I mentioned, there's specific ways to address all of them. And it's not, if you just say PMS, there's a kind of, okay, well, take this and it will fix your PMS. It's a kind of like on social media, you see, oh, take maca and that will solve PMS, or take shatavari, or take the name is Agnes Castus, and that was like, that's no. You have to get specific about what you're experiencing, because a syndrome, all it is a collection of different symptoms. And when it comes to PMS, I think in my book, I talk about like 150 different symptoms. Like that's a lot. And it doesn't give us the opportunity, when we say PMS, it doesn't give us the opportunity to be specific, and actually then with that specificity to be able to get the help that we need for whatever we're experiencing. And then when it comes to PMDD, we need to be able to delineate between PMS and PMDD. PMS and premenstrual symptoms typically happen about 7 to 10 days, depending on the length of the follicular and the ovulatory phases before the next period starts. Whereas PMD, premenstrual dysphoric disorder, typically starts right after ovulation. So it's this response to this post-ovulatory rise of progesterone, of estrogen, of allopregnanolone, and of GABA. And I've seen people say, oh, PMDD is just a severe form of PMS, and that's false. There is a completely different biological mechanism between PMDD and premenstrual symptoms. And so that timing, so we talked about timing and understanding when you're experiencing different symptoms in your menstrual cycle. That timing is really, really crucial when we're talking about PMDD.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, because exactly that, when I was sort of looking around to understand what the difference was, that's what came up a lot, was that PMDD was a severe form of PMS. And actually we're talking about two different points in the cycle, and like I said, two different biological mechanisms that are causing these symptoms. So that's really, really helpful. And like you said, just to reflect like how important it is to then know what's going on within your cycle. Because did I also read that PMDD in the UK is a registered disability, and that it can be something that people can take time off work for if that's what they're experiencing?
I didn't know that. I know that it is listed in the DSM, I think 5 or 6.
5.
And I think, I've heard people say different things about that. Once it's in the DSM and it's classified as a kind of mental health disorder, that, then that kind of makes it more severe and puts people on a pathway of like a more medicalized pathway, where they're thinking that, medication is the answer. But for some people, medication can be really helpful, because one of the with severe PMDD, one of the symptoms can be suicidal ideation, because you have this sensitivity to estrogen and progesterone, GABA, allopregnanolone, and in a kind of ideal world, and for most people, that rise of progesterone, of estrogen, is a positive one. After you ovulate, most people feel a lot of energy and they feel quite calm with it. But because of this kind of biological mechanism, that it's just not, I don't want to use the word faulty, but there's an issue there. That rise is quite a negative one. And in the severe cases, that can lead to, this feelings of worthlessness, hopelessness, suicidal ideation, like real kind of there's a lot of mental health symptoms with PMDD, but there's also physical symptoms like bloating, lethargy, muscle aches and pains, sleep difficulties, breast tenderness. And so this is why I think we need to be careful when we talk about PMDD, and really get it right, because for, the women who are experiencing it can be so severe and have a terrible impact on their day-to-day lives.
Yeah, that's such an important message to take home, I think, as well. What would you say if somebody out there is listening in and thinking this actually could be me? What would you recommend they do as a first step?
Yeah, so I would say that firstly, know that you're not alone. That there's help that you can get. If you're experiencing suicidal ideation, call the Samaritans. Just there's someone who's always on the end of a phone who will be able to talk to you, and just talking to someone can make a difference. One of the treatment pathways for PMDD is actually CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. And what's helpful about CBT as a form of therapy, a form of talking therapy, is that it's very action-based. So it gives you tools that you can use when you feel those kind of suicidal thoughts or that kind of feelings of worthlessness coming in. So what can you do instead? And gives you, I think that's really powerful. So knowing you're not alone, knowing that the Samaritans is a fantastic port of call. I don't know the number to hand, but
I'll put it in the notes.
Yeah. And then, of course, knowing that nutrition is a fantastic way to support yourself and to support your symptoms. And simple things can make a huge difference. So something like magnesium is really powerful. Magnesium that you get through dark leafy greens, nuts, seeds. Because what's really interesting is that the research shows that with PMDD, there's an issue with the HPA axis. So the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and the adrenal axis. So that's managing the stress response. And then linking it back to what might cause PMDD is that there's a hypothesis that with a history of trauma, going back to the big T, little t of name of this podcast, with a history of trauma and PTSD, another acronym, post-traumatic stress disorder, that's one of the risk factors for the onset of PMDD, because we know trauma has such an impact on the brain. And people who have experienced different types of trauma, it changes the way that their body produces something like cortisol, which is our primary stress hormone. And if, that excessive production of cortisol, that's going to have an impact. And so the research is showing us that there might be an issue with the HPA axis, and adding in something like magnesium is a way to help manage that stress response and to help calm the HPA axis. So you can get that through food. You can also get fantastic magnesium supplements. Like my favorite is magnesium glycinate. But then something like a magnesium threonate is great because it crosses the blood-brain barrier. And so it works on the brain, and it's helpful for people with anxiety as well. And anxiety is one of the symptoms of PMDD.
Wow, thank you so much for that, Denise. That was such a helpful explanation, and even to differentiate between the different forms of magnesium that people could supplement, and of course thinking about what they can do through their food as well. I think that's so helpful. And even I'm guessing even if a person hasn't necessarily got PMDD, I guess even if they are experiencing certain mental health issues around different times in their cycle, that same advice could apply.
Yeah, definitely. I think magnesium is it's an incredible mineral, and what studies are showing is that we just have less and less of it coming in through the soil, which means that we get less of it through the food that we eat. And so it's typically the supplement that I will reach for first for a lot of menstrual health problems, because it impacts us in so many different ways. Magnesium, it works on over 300 different functions in the body. So it's even something like, blood sugar regulation, stress response. It's incredible for reducing period pain. So that's just something so simple that someone can do, and it will make a difference as long as you're taking the right type of magnesium. If you have issues with digestion, so if you have diarrhea, don't take magnesium citrate, and because it works on the gut, and it can make diarrhea worse. And this is where I know I'm going off a little bit, but just to kind of just say briefly, reading ingredients is really important, because a lot of just kind of multivitamins or kind of stress formulas will have magnesium citrate in it, or magnesium oxide, which is a very cheap form of magnesium. And again, that acts on the digestive system as well.
Yeah, and as I understand it, glycinate is probably one of the highly absorbed one. It's more bioavailable as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
And the other thing with magnesium is, whilst we probably aren't getting enough of it because of the quality of our soil, the other thing is that there's so many things that we do in our day-to-day life, and being stressed out is one of them that actually causes us to excrete the little magnesium that we do have.
Yeah, I think, and what's really interesting is this trend at the moment of people taking pre-workout. I see this a lot, on social media, and I know you have thoughts on this because I can see it in your face. But because so many of us are just dealing with chronic stress, and pre-workout has a lot of electrolytes in it, and when you're all these electrolyte minerals, sodium, potassium, magnesium, they're like spark plugs for the body. And I just would find it interesting to talk to people who are taking pre-workout regularly, and seeing if there's any wider impacts that they're experiencing on their health as a result of that.
Yeah, that would be really interesting to explore. But yeah, I do have a bit of reaction to pre-workouts, because I think it's like a lot of things that people do. They see something, they do it, and they don't actually know whether it's needed. Probably could save themselves a lot of money, and a lot of times they're not really doing. I think we sort of talked about this offline. They're not doing the basic things within their nutrition to give them what they need to get the best, out of their workouts. Anyway.
Yeah.
Performance wise. So yes, I have a bit. Me and my brother used to get into it about pre-workouts. I think I've converted him now, but we will see. Time will tell. So this has been absolutely fantastic. A lot of the things that you've mentioned here, I'm just like, these are just offshoots for more content. You've talked about the HPA access, which I think is really important, particularly as we talk about it, how it pertains to PTSD and that little t trauma as well. Something else that you said there as well, I can't remember what it was now, but I'm sure as I go back I will find it. But yeah, I think it's all going to be in the show notes. I think the bits that I pick out that just really jump out to me. Other thing I will say, as well, Lenice, is that I love your approach of just like, you know, making sure that people are looking at the fundamentals of what they can do to support themselves before going down that route of taking, you know, what can be quite random supplements that are just being touted on social media. I think that's a really important takeaway there as well.
Yeah, I think it's going back to the basics is so important because there's a lot of noise when it comes to nutrition. And it even though, you know, we both have qualifications in nutrition, so, you know, but there's an expertise. Everyone feels like an expert and everyone talks about it with such authority. But what people don't understand is the power of the basics. You know, what are you adding into your meals that will help you get through your day in an energetic way? Well, that will support your mood, that will support your hormones, because food is the scaffolding for our hormones. And are you eating enough fat? Are you eating enough protein? What's the fiber situation? What are the colors on your plate? And just taking a really additive approach to your meals rather than thinking, I need to cut this out, I need to cut that out. I just think that gets us into this place of restriction, which then, you know, that's the area that you specialize in. Yeah. And that takes us to a bad place mentally. And so thinking about addition rather than subtraction is such a much more positive approach to nutrition, I find.
You know, I 100% agree with that. And the other thing that restriction also, you know, it takes you to a very, very tricky place, but also from a hormonal perspective, it's an absolute, you know, it can create a lot of havoc. I've seen a lot of hormonal issues within my clients resolved just through the fact when they start to eat enough, actually nourish themselves just by eating enough, and then a lot of the issues that they were having hormonally subside. And that's going to be different for different people, but that is something that I see a lot.
Yeah, eating enough and knowing that, you know, if you're not eating enough, your period will go missing. And your period is one of your vital signs. It's like, tells you, you know, is everything okay with your health? And so it's not a good thing when your period goes missing. I know that some people think, oh yeah, my period is gone. Awesome. No, not awesome. Because if you're missing your period, you're probably not ovulating, and you're probably not making, you're not ovulating, you're not making progesterone, which is this important calming hormone. And, you know, we see issues that, you know, progesterone is so important for so many other functions in the body. And if you're not, I just think it's just this cascade. So if you're missing your period, please reach out for support, because a period is so important to have.
Yeah, and I love that. It's one of your vital signs. Brilliant. Yeah. Lenice, before we finish up, I've got this new thing that I'm doing now. So I used to do this or that, and you've done a this or that. And I listened back to our this or that. I'm going to have to clip it and put it onto Instagram, because I listened back to our this or that, and I learned so much about you when we did that on Instagram last time. But this time around, I've asked you about a fun fact. So is there a fun fact that you would like to share? It can be on topic, off topic, but something that you think is an interesting fact that you know and would like to share with our listeners.
Okay, so my surprising fact is that actually when you look at Africa as a continent, is much bigger than people realize. And the maps that we see, where the US looks as big as Africa and Russia looks as big as, and Greenland looks so big, that's something called the Mercator projection. And yeah, it's a very top-down view of the world. But when you actually look, like if you look kind of like satellite images and maps made from satellite images, you can fit like the US, you can fit Europe, you can fit Canada and Russia into Africa. As a continent, it's much bigger than people realize. And one of our perceptions of the globe and the perceptions of the size of countries is based on this map, the Mercator projection. And that blew my mind when I first learned about that.
You've just blown my mind. I just kind of like it's that thing of like, if you don't know, you just wouldn't even, well, I wouldn't have thought about that. But actually when you're saying, I'm like, well, actually that now that feels obvious. But that is wild. Wow. That's a really interesting fact, Lindy. Thank you so much. I think that's going to be my new favourite question. Forget this or that. I'm going to start asking people for their favourite fact, because I'm like you. I'm a very curious soul, and I love to just find new information. And so that is an absolutely brilliant one. So thank you so much for that. Oh, this has been a wonderful conversation. I've written down at the top of my page here TikTok, so go and find that video that's had a wild amount of plays. Thank you so much for joining us. Let us know where we can find you.
Yeah, so I'm on social media at Eat Love Move. My website is www.eatlovemove.com. You can buy the book. You Can Have a Better Period anywhere you buy books online. And the podcast is called Period Story, and that's available anywhere you listen to podcasts.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Thanks for having me.